Sign the waiver, sign the contract, and enter the extreme haunted house. What's in the contract? Anything from physical to psychological torture. Do you want to get out? Try using the safe word, although no guarantees it'll actually work. Welcome to McCamey Manor, right here in the United States, a place where you agree to slaps, degradation, hair pulling, being held underwater, and numerous other forms of abuse. Sounds fun, doesn't it? But don't worry, you've signed the waiver. You've signed the contract, which makes all of these actions legal no matter what, right? Wrong. A contract is a legally binding document between two parties that the government recognizes and enforces. The key word here, legal. The government will only recognize a signed document if its conditions are legal. How McCamey Manor, yes, a real place, has been allowed to operate, I truly don't know. But we can apply the principles of a contract to consent in the government. The government may not infringe on our rights. So just as a contract for physical abuse is invalid, so too is consent that would allow for this infringement. Perhaps we should clarify consent. Technically, consent is simply affirming, agreeing, or allowing. But are there bounds to this? Could I consent to become a slave? There are some people who think that true freedom implies the right to sell yourself into slavery, but here's why we apply our contract principle. Just as a contract to do something illegal isn't even recognized by the government, a free society cannot allow its people to consent to destroy their ability to consent. Reasoning from the nature of man, the true role of the government, and the benefits to society, we can see that consent has moral bounds. And when applied to the government, we can understand that consent never lets the government overstep its limitations. Okay, so the nature of man sets the precedent for this consent of the governed. But what does that really mean? Well, man has a right to self-determination. That's what liberty is. Man also has a greater nature over animals through his ability to achieve and make choices. All of this is involved in consent. Man freely chooses to consent to protect his ability to achieve. Man is born independent and seeks to be free. John Locke formed the proper standard of the government based on the fact that this institution doesn't need to be involved in every aspect of our lives to protect our ability to achieve. This is also why a government functioning within its limitations allows for a free market. Adam Smith, a champion of the free market, pointed out in The Wealth of Nations that man seeks his best life, always. In this world, he needs help to attain that. Consenting to be governed by an entity with power and authority is the way man does this. In a truly free and consenting society, the government's only role is to protect the governed from force and fraud, the two things that take away a person's natural rights. To discuss consent as a mere agreement without limitations is to validate totalitarian government. Thomas Hobbes saw society as under a social contract, where us citizens would give up all of our rights to an absolute ruler for peace. Here, consent was nothing more than an obligation. Pragmatics John Dewey and James Hayden Tufts argued that our rights came from the outside, from society. Here, consent was simply assumed. At least Machiavelli was a more honest authoritarian, recommending that a prince rule through fear, disregarding any concept of consent. Our founding fathers fought these ideas through the U.S. Constitution. America uniquely recognizes the importance of consent, but she also recognizes consent's limitations. The Constitution and Bill of Rights properly direct the government to serve its people through this limited agreement. We, the people, consent to let the government protect our rights. But that's it. That is the extent to which we can consent. When the government remembers its only role, nobody gives up their rights in the process. Now, limited consent isn't just my moralistic political interpretation of the government. It's also the most beneficial approach for bettering society. When the government becomes the market, it implements policies that affect trade, profits, and wages. No matter what the intentions behind these policies might be, they only have negative side effects. By placing roadblocks at every turn, they hinder an individual's ability to achieve in the market. True freedom of self-determination is not possible, and thus, neither is proper consent. An individual here cannot maximize their benefit to society. In his book, FDR's Folly, historian Jim Powell describes how government involvement prolonged the Great Depression. There had been many other major crashes in US history, but they generally lasted under a year. Because of artificial government tampering in the economy, the free market was not able to organically correct the 1929 stock market crash. This disaster was so devastating that many Americans gave their consent to let the government overstep its limitations. If this consent had been properly invalidated, the Great Depression would have ended much sooner. Today, too many people think the government exists to subsidize its citizens to fix different crises. Numerous policies exist to provide handouts and provide greater protection, but in exchange, citizens must agree to larger taxes, less property freedom, and greater overall government intervention. Like the Great Depression, we're overstepping our bounds for what we can consent to. And also like the Great Depression, we're only amplifying the problems. No matter how good they sound, we must eliminate policies that let the government's role become too large or too vague. Any authority we do give the government stems from something that is embedded within our own incredible nature. This is what our forefathers understood. The government works for us, not the other way around. We don't consent to use the government to get ahead. We consent because we have rights that are worth protecting. Don't let the government take your role. Understand that you are consenting to protect your individuality, your humanity. The consent of the governed is the best guiding principle for a nation that respects individual value. As the governed, may we all consent with such purpose.